You never expect the quiet streets and white picket fences to hide a battlefield. But sometimes, war doesn't come with guns or soldiers. It comes with lawn chairs, warning letters, and HOA presidents drunk on power. I moved here for peace, a clean break from the chaos of my job, a place where no one knew my title or what I did for a living. Just me, my driveway, and some well-earned silence. But that illusion shattered the day she showed up with a clipboard and a smile too sharp to trust. What started as a simple disagreement over parking spiraled into something far darker. And what she didn't know was who she had just picked a fight with. If there was one thing Avery Linwood had come to value after 15 years as a federal prosecutor, it was silence. Not the kind of silence you get in a courtroom after dropping a key piece of evidence. No, this was the deeper, sweeter kind. The kind you could hear in the wind brushing against pine trees. The kind that came with dew-soaked mornings and the distant sound of a hawk circling above. That's why she bought the cottage at the edge of Briarwood Hollow, a small, exclusive neighborhood tucked into the foothills of Boulder, Colorado. Half a mile from the gated entrance, her property stood alone, a wide stretch of land buffered by thick woods and a narrow creek. Her kind of peace. No city horns, no attorneys yelling into phones, and most importantly, no HOAs, or so she thought. It was her third morning in the new house, coffee in one hand and ranger's leash in the other, when the knock came. Not a polite knock. A knock with purpose. She opened the door to find a woman in her early 50s, standing like she owned the land beneath her heels. Pearl earrings, flawlessly pressed khakis, and a clipboard hugged tightly to her chest. Her expression was cheerful. Too cheerful. "Good morning. I'm Elaine Voss," the woman said, extending a hand without waiting for Avery to take it. "President of the Briarwood Hollow Homeowners Association." Avery blinked. "Nice to meet you. But my property isn't in the HOA. Elaine's smile faltered just enough to notice. "Technically, no. But your lot abuts the HOA boundary line, and we like to include everyone in the spirit of community. We consider you a passive member." Avery raised a brow. "That's not a legal term." Lane laughed a little too brightly. "Well, maybe not in court, but in neighborhoods. Goodwill means everything." Ranger barked softly at Elaine's feet, and she flinched. Avery tugged on his leash. "I appreciate the introduction," Avery said, inching the door closed. "But I'm just here to enjoy some quiet." Elaine's eyes scanned the porch, her nose slightly wrinkled. "Lovely dog, but, we do have noise ordinances, especially concerning barking before 7 a.m. Avery didn't respond. She simply closed the door. Behind her calm face, a familiar itch returned, the one she got when witnesses lied under oath or when defense attorneys twisted facts into fiction. She hadn't escaped the courtroom. She'd walked into a different kind of trial. 2 weeks passed. Avery focused on planting lavender around the fence line and repairing the old greenhouse out back. She learned the names of 2 neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Keller, both retired teachers who offered zucchini and gossip in equal measure. They mentioned Elaine in hushed tones, like she was a storm cloud waiting to strike. "Don't let her see your trash bins on a Tuesday," Mrs. Keller whispered one afternoon, "or she'll send one of her famous reminders." "She means threats," Mr. Keller added, rolling his eyes. Avery smiled politely. She didn't worry. She knew the law better than most. But then the letters started. The first was wrapped in a gold-embossed envelope. "Welcome to the community." Inside, a list of expectations. Lawn height restrictions, trash container hours, driveway usage policies, and a voluntary invitation to join the HOA for a modest $150 monthly fee. She tossed it. The second letter wasn't as friendly. "Your vehicle was observed parked facing the street, which contradicts community appearance standards," Avery scoffed. Her car was parked in her own driveway, barely visible from the road. The third was handwritten and anonymous. Just because your house sits outside the gate doesn't mean you're above the rules. That night, Avery sat on the porch with a legal pad, jotting down everything. Not because she was scared, because she knew what was coming. She'd seen it in court, harassment masked as regulation, coercion masked as concern. By week 4, it got worse. She spotted Elaine and 2 other board members walking the perimeter of her fence with measuring wheels and clipboards. Elaine was pointing at the fence posts, talking animatedly. When she saw Avery watching from the window, she smiled and waved like they were old friends. The next day, she received a letter stating her fence may be encroaching on HOA easement grounds, and she should consider adjusting its position for harmony. Avery leaned back in her chair, reading it again. This time, she didn't toss it. She filed it in a folder labeled Evidence. The final straw came during a quiet Saturday morning. Avery was walking Ranger by the creek when she spotted a new sign staked at the far end of her land. Future site of Briarwood Hollow, Community Trail, subject to annexation. Annexation? She marched back to the house, dug through her closing documents, and confirmed what she already knew. Her land was privately owned, not subject to HOA rule, not zoned for annexation, not anyone's playground. This was no longer about letters or fences. This was a battle over autonomy. And Avery Linwood wasn't someone you pushed. As dusk fell, she poured herself a glass of wine and sat in front of her laptop. She opened a blank file and typed, Case name, Voss versus Linwood, preliminary timeline of events. She hadn't planned to go back into fight mode so soon after retirement, but if Elaine wanted a war, she had just declared it against the wrong person. The next morning, Avery woke up to the sound of a chainsaw. For a split second, she thought it was a nightmare. But no. Out the window, 2 men in neon vests were trimming a tree that sat right on the property line between her land and the HOA's gated entrance. One of the men was already halfway up the trunk, sawing off a large, healthy branch that shaded part of her vegetable garden. Avery was outside before the second branch hit the ground. "Stop!" she barked. The younger of the 2 looked startled and turned off the chainsaw. "Sorry, ma'am. HOA orders," said the tree was leaning into future trail space. Avery crossed her arms. "That tree is on my land. You're trespassing." "Talk to the boss," the guy muttered, jerking a thumb toward a white SUV idling nearby. "Elaine." "Of course." Avery stormed toward the vehicle, her boots crunching against gravel. Elaine rolled down the window slowly, that same saccharine smile stretched across her face. "Good morning, Avery. I hope you don't mind a little beautification. That tree's roots were interfering with the HOA's irrigation plans for the new trail system." "There is no trail system," Avery said through gritted teeth. "And you're on private land." Elaine waved a manicured hand as if brushing away a cobweb. "All of this will be resolved soon. The annexation request has been filed with the zoning board." Avery froze. "You filed what?" Elaine's smile widened. "It's perfectly legal. Since your parcel touches the HOA boundary, we've petitioned to have it annexed into Briarwood Hollow jurisdiction." "You can't annex private property without consent." Elaine tilted her head. "Let's just say, we're confident your consent won't be required for long." She rolled up her window and drove off, leaving Avery standing in a cloud of dust and disbelief. That night, Avery pulled out her laptop and began researching land use law in Boulder County. The more she dug, the more outrageous it became. The HOA had filed for silent annexation under community integration ordinances, a rarely used clause that allowed associations to annex adjacent land if no legal objection was raised within 30 days. There were only 17 days left. She opened the folder marked Evidence and began outlining her strategy. Over the next 2 days, Avery documented everything: the broken tree branch, the new signs, the letters. She sent formal cease and desist orders to the HOA, citing trespassing and unlawful property modification. Elaine responded with a 4-paragraph email full of vague legal terms and passive-aggressive pleasantries. But Avery wasn't just preparing a legal rebuttal. She was planning a public one. She printed flyers and walked door to door around Briarwood Hollow. At each home, she introduced herself, not as a prosecutor, not as a victim, but as a neighbor. "I'm not asking for favors," she said, "just the truth. Has Elaine ever used HOA funds to pursue personal goals? Have you ever felt pressured to comply with rules that were never voted on?" Most people gave the same answer, a tired look and a quiet nod. Then came the whispers. "I once got a citation for planting unapproved tulips. She told me if I didn't take down my wind chimes, I'd be fined daily. She rejected my solar panel request even though the county had already approved it." Avery started taking notes. Each small story formed a pattern. Elaine wasn't a leader. She was a tyrant with a fancy title. One afternoon, Avery knocked on the door of House 14, a modest colonial with a porch swing and a faded American flag. An elderly man answered, holding a mug that read "Retired, not expired." "Mr. Levine?" He nodded. "You're the woman with the driveway tree, right?" Avery smiled. "That's me. I heard you were on the original HOA charter." He hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in." Inside, the house smelled of old books and fresh bread. On the kitchen table sat a box of documents. Without a word, Mr. Levine pulled out a worn binder labeled Briarwood Founding Guidelines. "I've been waiting for someone like you," he said. "She's rewritten the rules so many times I barely recognize the neighborhood." Avery flipped through the documents. The original guidelines were fair, democratic, even flexible. Elaine's new ones were filled with penalties, surveillance, and clauses that consolidated power under the president's authority. "This," Avery said, tapping a section, "is exactly what I needed." She scanned and emailed everything to her attorney. When she stood to leave, Mr. Levine stopped her. "You're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for all of us." Back home, Avery filed an emergency motion with the zoning board to halt the annexation, based on lack of consent and procedural violations. She also submitted a formal complaint to the HOA Regulatory Office, citing misuse of authority and misappropriation of community funds. The final step, letting the community know. She created a private website called Briarwood Truth.com and uploaded everything. The tree incident, the surveillance photos, the HOA documents, the founding bylaws, and even anonymous testimonies. Within 48 hours, the page had over 300 views, more than half the neighborhood. Avery didn't sign her name. She didn't need to. Everyone knew who had finally stood up to Elaine Voss. And Elaine knew it too. The war was no longer quiet. It was just getting started. The Monday after the website launched, the neighborhood felt different. Mailboxes no longer creaked open quietly. Neighbors stood around in clusters, whispering. Joggers stopped mid-run to scroll through their phones. Even the landscapers avoided eye contact with the HOA office. Avery knew something had shifted. Her inbox was full of anonymous emails, thank yous, confessions, and a few anonymous tips that chilled her to the bone. One message stood out. "Check the HOA's community budget file from last spring. Look at the vendor named Evoke Services, LLC. It's not real. A friend." She forwarded the message to her lawyer, then clicked on the link herself. Evoke Services had billed $9,750 for community beautification enhancements. No photos, no invoices, no permits. Just a single electronic signature. Elaine's. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't just about control anymore. This was fraud. That night, Avery sat on her porch, legal pads scattered across the table, files under her elbow, a second coffee going cold beside her laptop. She had done difficult cases before, high profile, even dangerous ones, but nothing had ever felt this personal. Behind her quiet resolve was a storm of emotion. Elaine hadn't just tried to intimidate her. She had tried to erase her, gaslight the community, reshaped truth with the smug confidence of someone who had never been challenged. But now, the cracks were showing. Avery received a call from Tom Granger, the treasurer of the HOA. He was nervous, voice low. "Look, I never thought she'd go this far. I just signed what was put in front of me, but I don't think we're clean anymore." "Do you have records?" "Only paper. I was told never to scan anything in. Said digital files could be misinterpreted." He laughed bitterly. "I guess she didn't want a trail." Avery leaned forward. "Can I see them?" Silence. Then, "Meet me at 10. Bring no one." At 10:03 p.m., Avery parked 2 blocks from Tom's house and walked the rest of the way. He was waiting on this porch, a canvas tote beside him. When he handed it over, their hands briefly touched, and in that moment, Avery saw the guilt etched deep into his eyes. Guilt not just for enabling Elaine, but for staying silent while others suffered. Inside the tote were dozens of meeting notes, handwritten budgets, and personal memos with Elaine's signature. Some were mundane, others damning. One sheet caught her attention immediately. "If she refuses to comply, proceed with escalation. Force code reviews, document irregularities, initiate soft pressure." It was dated 2 weeks before the tree incident, and she was unmistakably Avery. By Wednesday, local news had caught wind of the website. An investigative reporter from a regional station emailed Avery for comment. She declined the interview, but leaked the documents. Thursday morning, Briarwood Hollow woke up to its HOA president on the 6 o'clock news, her face blurred, but her voice recognizable as she gave a tone-deaf statement about preserving harmony through community enforcement. The piece ended with this: "As of this report, no residents have confirmed knowledge of the HOA's petition to annex adjacent private land." The backlash was immediate. Anonymous flyers with the headline, "Who Really Owns Briarwood?" appeared in mailboxes. Elaine's pristine image started to crumble. People she once intimidated now walked by her home without waving. Someone spray-painted, "You work for us," on her sidewalk, in chalk. But still, enough to rattle her. By Friday, the HOA board scheduled an emergency closed-door meeting. But Avery had already beaten them to the punch. She filed a public injunction through the county to block the annexation, pending a full ethics investigation into the HOA board. She also submitted a civil suit for damages tied to property interference and intentional distress, and she made sure the press received the filing number. On Sunday morning, Elaine appeared on Avery's porch. No smile, no clipboard, no ponytail tightness, just fear. "You've made your point," she said, voice brittle. "But this has gone far enough." Avery stood still. "Has it?" Elaine's eyes twitched. "You don't understand what this is doing to my family. My husband's job is on the line. My kids. Did you think about my life when you tried to destroy it?" Silence. Elaine opened her mouth to speak, then shut it again. She turned without another word and walked down the steps, back toward her meticulously landscaped kingdom. Avery didn't follow. She didn't have to. Elaine was no longer on the offensive. She was retreating. That night, Avery received another anonymous message. This one was a scanned receipt from a private security firm detailing property surveillance coverage billed to the HOA account. The date? 1 week before Elaine claimed Avery's vehicle was a suspicious presence in the community. It wasn't just about power anymore. Elaine had turned her neighborhood into a private empire. And now, it was collapsing 1 brick at a time. The following Monday, the town hall chamber buzzed with anticipation. It wasn't just another HOA meeting. It was the hearing. The county had finally accepted Avery's injunction request and opened a formal review of the HOA's conduct, including the unlawful annexation attempts, misuse of funds, and civil harassment. Elaine hadn't expected it to escalate this far. She entered the room, flanked by 2 HOA board members, both visibly uncomfortable. Her trademark pearl smile was gone. In its place, a stiff, brittle expression, barely concealing the panic underneath. She clutched a thick binder filled with documents, most of which Avery already had scanned, highlighted, and submitted. Avery sat across from her, dressed simply, calmly flipping through her notes. But beneath her composed exterior, her heart pounded. This wasn't just a hearing. This was accountability. And the truth, finally, was about to speak louder than Elaine's charm. The county legal advisor called the room to order. A neutral moderator opened the floor. Avery stood first. She walked to the microphone, unfolded a printed image from her binder, and displayed it to the board, a time-stamped photo of her car, taken by Elaine, with the HOA president's personal notes attached. Ladies and gentlemen, this wasn't about rules. This was personal targeting. She clicked to the next image, a scanned copy of the petition for annexation, complete with fake names and falsified addresses. The HOA attempted to rewrite property boundaries with falsified support. They tried to steal my land. Gasps rose from the audience. The final page, a payment record showing HOA funds paid to a private surveillance firm. The invoice clearly indicated the subject: resident, Wilson, Avery, unregistered, uncooperative. That last word echoed in the chamber: uncooperative. Avery paused, then looked directly at Elaine. What does it say about leadership when disagreement is treated like a threat? The moderator asked if she had anything else. She did. A sworn affidavit from Tom Granger, HOA treasurer, confessing the board had knowingly submitted altered zoning documents to the city planning office. It also admitted Elaine had ordered the HOA's private landscaping crew to subtly blur the lines between community and private space. The board went silent. Elaine's fingers tightened around her binder. Now it was Elaine's turn. She stood, voice trembling slightly, and tried to salvage her image. I acted with the best interests of the community, she began. My only goal was harmony and order. We believed Ms. Wilson's presence was disruptive to the visual and social fabric of our neighborhood. Did you or did you not know she was a law enforcement officer? The moderator asked. Elaine hesitated. No. Avery's lawyer stood. Objection. We have video footage of Ms. Elaine greeting Officer Johnson on Ms. Wilson's property after being informed of her position. Elaine blinked, then doubled down. Even if I knew it was irrelevant, no one is above the rules. The crowd murmured. It wasn't going well, especially when Avery's legal team presented surveillance footage from the security firm. Footage that not only proved Elaine ordered the firm to watch Avery's home, but also showed that she had been on Avery's property after dark more than once with no explanation. The moderator ended the hearing with a clear statement. We'll be recommending a full audit of the HOA's leadership and a formal cease and desist regarding Ms. Wilson's property. Elaine didn't wait for the room to clear before she left. Avery watched her go, the weight of 3 months of tension pressing against her ribs. She hadn't won. Not yet. But the balance had shifted. And now, the system she trusted was finally on her side. Later that evening, Avery received a message from a young couple 2 streets over. We've been silent for months. Elaine tried to fine us for putting up a pride flag in our window. When we refused, our trash pickup was delayed for 6 weeks. We're ready to testify. The floodgates were opening. People who had once been intimidated were speaking out. Avery realized something important. This was no longer just her story. It was theirs, too. The week following the hearing was a whirlwind. Phone calls, emails, strangers stopping Avery on her evening walks, whispering their stories like they were confessing sins. Some were angry, others defeated, but the thread was the same. They had all been victims of Elaine's quiet tyranny. Avery's inbox overflowed with screenshots, letters, fines, documentation from years past. One woman had been fined $200 for improper seasonal decorations because her Halloween pumpkin was left out a day past the HOA's display deadline. A single father had been threatened with property liens after refusing to trim his hedges into the approved geometric pattern. And perhaps most heartbreaking, an elderly veteran had received repeated citations for having a faded American flag on his porch. Elaine had called it an aesthetic violation. Avery spent every evening organizing the evidence into binders, labeling each incident, building what her lawyer started calling the Pine Grove dossier. Meanwhile, Elaine was unraveling. Neighbors reported seeing her pacing in her driveway at night, phone pressed to her ear, yelling into the darkness. She showed up uninvited to 3 homes that week, trying to clarify misunderstandings and explain the HOA's intentions. But people were no longer buying it. The power she once held so tightly was slipping through her fingers, and she knew it. Desperation makes people reckless. That Friday night, Avery returned home to find her mailbox smashed in. Her garbage can tipped and dragged halfway down the block. On her doorstep, a printout of one of her old citations, scribbled across in red ink. "You don't belong here." The police took her report seriously this time. And this time, a cruiser stayed parked near her house for the night. The lines had been crossed. Again. But now everyone was watching. The next HOA meeting wasn't hosted in the usual community center. It was moved to the county courthouse. Over 70 residents packed the public hearing room, more than had ever attended any HOA meeting before. The Pine Grove Estates HOA, once a symbol of order and suburban perfection, now stood on the edge of implosion. Elaine sat at the far end of the room, stiff and silent. Her lawyer, red-faced and exhausted, flipped through a worn briefcase that had clearly seen too much of this battle already. Avery stood again, not just as the woman they tried to silence, but as a voice for everyone who had ever been dismissed. She opened with a statement. "This isn't about fences. It isn't about vehicles. It's about power abused, trust broken, and fear used as a weapon." One by one, neighbors stepped up. The veteran spoke first, voice shaking but firm. Then the single dad. Then a teenage girl who shared how her mother cried after receiving 5 separate violations in 1 week. Even those who had once supported Elaine were now seeing clearly. The board couldn't defend her anymore. By the end of the hearing, the county issued a suspension of all HOA enforcement authority pending investigation. Elaine's title was revoked. Her access to HOA funds revoked, and her actions officially turned over to the district attorney's office for review of misuse of community funds, harassment, and civil misconduct. Later that night, Avery sat on her back porch, tea in hand, exhaustion finally hitting her. Not from the work, but from what it had taken to get here, to make people believe her, to stand in rooms where her truth had to be proven over and over again. The stars above were quiet, but her phone buzzed once more. A message from the single dad. "Tonight, my son asked if we could put the basketball hoop back up. He hasn't smiled like that in months, thank you." And just like that, everything shifted. This had never been just a fight against one woman. It was a fight for the soul of a neighborhood. 3 weeks after the courthouse hearing, Pine Grove Estates looked and felt like a different place. The once silent sidewalks buzzed with conversation. Porch lights were on later than usual, and front yards filled with folding chairs, laughter, and music. Halloween decorations returned early. The air no longer held tension. It held relief. But for Avery Wilson, the true resolution hadn't come yet. Her attorney had just confirmed it. The county prosecutor's office was pressing formal charges against Elaine Rusk for harassment, fraud, and obstruction of justice, tied directly to her conduct as HOA president. The HOA's financial audit revealed over $48,000 in misallocated funds. Donations rerouted to personal accounts, unauthorized payments to contractors who never completed work, and expense reports with luxury dinners, spa visits, and boutique shopping on behalf of the community. But what sealed Elaine's fate wasn't just money. It was fear. Avery's security footage had shown Elaine lurking near her property the night before the final intimidation note appeared. While not enough for criminal charges on its own, it bolstered the civil harassment case. especially when combined with testimony from former HOA members who admitted to being coerced into silence or complicity. At the new town hall meeting, called by a temporary community board, Avery didn't speak from the back anymore. She was asked to speak at the front. When she stepped to the podium, she looked across a crowd of familiar faces, some embarrassed for their past silence, some inspired, all watching. This community didn't need control. It needed connection. What we allowed to happen here under the name of rules wasn't leadership. It was intimidation, but we fixed that. Together. Applause erupted, not out of politeness, but from conviction. Then came the vote. A unanimous decision to dissolve the former HOA and replace it with a community council. Not a regulatory body, but a group of elected residents dedicated to mediation, transparency, and unity. Elaine wasn't present for the vote. She had already moved out, quietly, under the cover of early morning. Her home, once the pristine pride of the street, now sat with a for sale sign crooked on the front lawn. The bushes she'd once trimmed obsessively had grown wild, symbolic of the very control she'd lost. Neighbors said she never said goodbye. But that wasn't the ending Avery needed. One final moment brought closure. The envelope arrived at her mailbox. A formal letter of apology, not from Elaine, but from the remaining former board members. It acknowledged her courage, condemned their inaction, and enclosed a signed resolution promising restitution to all those unfairly fined, harassed, or targeted during Elaine's presidency. Avery smiled and tucked it into her case files, not as revenge, but as record. Weeks passed. One afternoon, while on patrol in her district, Avery stopped her cruiser in front of a school crosswalk. Kids waved. A father she once helped in court gave her a thumbs up from the sidewalk. One of the teachers, who happened to live in Pine Grove, approached her window. "Hey, Chief," she said with a grin. "They still tell the story about you in the parking war. It gets better every time." Avery chuckled. "As long as it ends with peace, they can embellish all they want." As she drove off, she thought about how odd it was, how a parked car and a bitter woman had nearly broken a community, and how one act of standing firm had helped rebuild it. The badge on her chest wasn't just a symbol of law. It had become a reminder. Sometimes the greatest change comes not from arrests or citations, but from holding your ground when no one else dares to.